The heart monitor's steady beep became my constant companion, marking time like a metronome of betrayal. 3 days in this sterile prison, and already I could sense the shift in their behavior. The way they moved around my hospital room, their shoulders tense, their smiles just a fraction too wide. I'm Sawyer, and until last Tuesday, I thought I knew what loyalty meant. Emily drew you something special, Brian said, holding our daughter's hand as they entered my room. His cologne, the one I'd given him for Christmas, hung thick in the air, mixing with antiseptic and something else. Something feminine. Emily rushed forward, her ponytail bouncing, clutching a piece of paper to her chest. Mommy, look. She thrust the drawing toward me, her face beaming with pride. I took it, noting how Brian hung back near the door, checking his phone. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, though my eyes caught on something odd in the corner of the drawing. 3 figures, 2 tall, 1 small. But I wasn't in it. That's Daddy and Aunt Natalie taking me to the park, Emily explained, pointing at the figures. See? We got ice cream. Brian's head snapped up from his phone. Hey why don't you go ask the nurse for some juice? The moment Emily skipped out, Brian stepped closer, his face arranged in that careful expression I'd grown to hate. The doctors say your numbers are improving. Natalie's been a huge help with Emily, you know. We couldn't manage without her. I bet you couldn't, I thought, studying his face. The same face I'd woken up to for 12 years, now somehow foreign. How often has she been helping? What do you mean? With Emily. How often? He shifted his weight, glancing at the door. Oh, you know. When needed. Speaking of which, I should probably call her about tomorrow's pickup schedule. From school? I interrupted. I thought you were handling that. Meeting got moved. Can't reschedule. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Natalie offered. Of course she did. My best friend of 20 years, always so eager to help lately. The woman who'd been my maid of honor, who'd held my hand through my first miscarriage, who now wore perfume that clung to my husband's clothes. The monitor betrayed my rising pulse, its beeping quickening. A nurse appeared, all efficiency and concerned looks. Everything okay in here? Fine, I managed, forcing a smile. Just excited about going home soon. After the nurse left, Brian checked his watch. I should get Emily home for dinner. Need anything? No. The word came out harder than I intended. I'm sure Natalie can handle whatever I might need. He paused at the door, frowning slightly. You seem different. Are you sure you're feeling okay? I watched him, this man I thought I knew, standing in the doorway like a stranger. Never better. After they left, I stared at Emily's drawing until my vision blurred. 3 figures at the park, all holding hands. A family portrait where I'd been neatly erased, replaced by my best friend. The paper crumpled in my grip. My phone buzzed, a text from Greg, our neighbor. Saw something today you should know about. When can I visit? I typed back one word, tomorrow. The monitor kept its steady rhythm, marking each beat of my heart as it hardened. They thought I was weak, confined to this bed, too sick to see what was happening right in front of me. But they'd forgotten something crucial about me. I'd always been good at playing the long game. And now, watching the sun set through my hospital window, I had nothing but time to plan exactly how I would make them pay for every smile. Every touch, every betrayal they thought I couldn't see. The game was just beginning. Greg arrived early the next morning, his face grim. He pulled the visitor's chair close to my bed, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for eavesdroppers. You look better, he said, but his eyes told a different story. Skip the pleasantries, I replied. What did you see? He rubbed his jaw, the way he always did before delivering bad news. Tuesday afternoon. I was working in my front yard when Natalie's car pulled up to your house. Brian came out, this was maybe 2 hours after he'd left here. They hugged. Not a friendly hug, Sawyer. The monitor betrayed me again, its beeping accelerating. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Go on. Emily was at soccer practice. They went inside. Stayed for about an hour. My fingers dug into the sheets. An hour. There's more. Greg leaned closer. Yesterday morning, I saw them at Riverside Cafe. They were intimate. Holding hands across the table. I took a picture with my phone, but... Show me. He hesitated. You're still recovering. Maybe we should. Show me the damn picture, Greg. He pulled out his phone, swiped a few times, then handed it to me. The image was slightly blurry, but clear enough. Brian and Natalie at our favorite breakfast spot, their heads close together, his hand covering hers. Her wedding ring, to her husband of 15 years, caught the light. Delete it, I said, handing the phone back. What? But don't you want? I said delete it. I have something better in mind. Before Greg could respond, Emily burst into the room, followed by Natalie. My daughter's face lit up at the sight of me, but I noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the slight droop in her usually bouncy step. Uncle Greg. Emily wrapped her arms around his waist. Natalie stood in the doorway, her designer purse clutched like a shield. Greg, I didn't expect to see you here. Just checking on our patient, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Emily, want to help me find the vending machine? Your mom probably needs to rest. After they left, Natalie perched on the edge of my bed, her perfume, the same scent I'd detected on Brian, making my stomach turn. How are you feeling? She asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, pretending to adjust my pillow. Where's Brian? Work emergency. He asked me to bring Emily. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We're all so worried about you. Are you? She blinked. Of course. You're my best friend. Funny thing about best friends, I said, keeping my voice light. They usually don't fuck each other's husbands. The color drained from her face. Sawyer, I don't. I held up my hand. Not here. Not now. But soon, we're going to have a conversation about loyalty. About consequences. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. And right now, you're going to leave. Tell Emily you have a headache or whatever lie comes easiest to you. Greg will stay with us. She stood, swaying slightly. Please, let me explain. Oh, you'll explain. But first, I want you to spend the next few days wondering exactly what I know, and how I know it. I want you to look at your phone every time it buzzes, and wonder if today's the day your husband finds out. I want you to feel what I'm feeling, that slow, creeping dread that everything you love is about to implode. Tears welled in her eyes. We never meant. Get out. After she left, I heard Emily's disappointed voice in the hallway, Natalie's murmured excuse. Greg appeared in the doorway, Emily beside him. Aunt Natalie didn't look good, Emily said, climbing onto my bed. Is she sick too? I stroked my daughter's hair, meeting Greg's knowing gaze over her head. No, sweetie. But she's about to be. Greg nodded slightly, understanding passing between us. The game was changing. No more passive observation from my hospital bed. No more waiting for the next betrayal. It was time to make them understand exactly who they were dealing with. Emily snuggled closer, and I held her tight, already planning my next move. Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, it's served piece by piece, letting them watch it coming but unable to stop it. And I was just getting started. The day I came home from the hospital, Emily brought me another drawing. This one made my hands shake. Look, Mommy. It's from when we went to the lake last weekend. I stared at the crayon figures, Brian and Natalie in a boat, Emily between them. The water was scribbled dark blue, angry waves that matched the storm building inside me. The lake? Daddy said you were too sick for visitors, but you'd want us to have fun. Emily's voice wavered. Were you lonely? I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Never lonely when I think of you, baby. Greg appeared in the doorway, carrying my overnight bag. He'd insisted on driving us home, claiming Brian had an unavoidable meeting. The look we exchanged said everything about what kind of meeting it probably was. Emily, Greg said, want to help me make some tea for your mom? After they left, I opened my phone's browser. Location sharing was still enabled on our family account, something Brian had apparently forgotten. I scrolled through the history, my throat tightening. The lake house. Their favorite cafe. A hotel downtown. My phone buzzed, a text from Natalie, can we talk? Please? Before I could respond, Emily rushed back in, clutching something behind her back. I found more pictures. From Daddy's special box. Special box? She produced a small wooden chest I'd never seen before. It was under their bed when I was playing hide and seek with Aunt Natalie. Their bed. Not his bed. Not our bed. Inside the box, beneath a stack of receipts, lay a collection of photographs. Brian and Natalie at various locations, looking carefree, looking in love. The dates on the backs went back 8 months. Emily, I managed, when did you find this? Last week. Aunt Natalie said it was a surprise for your birthday, but that didn't make sense because your birthday was last month and... Greg appeared, taking in my expression and the scattered photos. Hey I think I hear the ice cream truck. Want to check? After she bounded out, Greg picked up one of the photos. Jesus, Sawyer. This is 8 months. My voice sounded strange, distant. 8 months of them playing house with my daughter while I worked late shifts at the hospital. 8 months of business trips and girls' nights out. What are you going to do? I gathered the photos, arranging them carefully. First, I'm going to call my lawyer. Then my bank. Then... The front door opened. Brian's voice carried up the stairs, hello? Anyone home? Greg touched my shoulder. Want me to stay? No. I slipped the photos into my bedside drawer. But don't go far. Brian appeared in the doorway, his smile faltering when he saw Greg. Oh. Didn't know you'd be here. Just leaving, Greg said. He gave my hand a quick squeeze, before heading out. Brian watched him go, then turned to me with that practiced concerned expression. How are you feeling? Should you be up already? Interesting question from someone who couldn't be bothered to pick up his wife from the hospital. I told you, that meeting. At the lake house? He froze. What? Or was it the Grand Hotel downtown? I get confused, there have been so many meetings lately. Color drained from his face. Sawyer, I can explain. Can you explain it to Emily? She found your little memory box. She's been trying to understand why her daddy and Aunt Natalie have so many secret pictures together. He stepped toward me. Please, let's not do this now. You're still recovering. Don't. I held up my hand. Don't pretend you care about my recovery. Don't pretend you haven't been planning this, documenting your little romance like teenagers. Just tell me one thing, was it worth it? I never meant. To get caught? To hurt Emily? To destroy everything we built? Which part wasn't meant to happen, Brian? Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Emily burst in, ice cream cone in hand. Daddy. You're home. I watched him hug our daughter, saw the guilt flash across his face. In that moment, I made my decision. This wouldn't be a quick revenge. No, this required something more sophisticated, more complete. They'd taken 8 months of my life. Now I'd take everything of theirs. Starting right now. The bank statement trembled in my hands as I sat in our home office. 3 withdrawals from our joint account last month, $2,000 each time. Hotel charges. Expensive restaurants. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany's I'd never seen. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head from our morning meeting, document everything. Every receipt, every transaction. The more evidence we have, the stronger your position. The front door opened downstairs. Brian's footsteps, then Emily's excited chatter. I quickly photographed the statement with my phone, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. "Mom?" Emily called. "Can you help me with my science project?" "Coming, sweetheart." I tucked the statement away and headed downstairs, passing Brian in the hallway. He reached for my arm, but I stepped aside, my shoulder brushing the wall. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About the $2,000 dinner at Le Blanc last month?" I kept my voice low, watching his face pale. "Or about the Tiffany bracelet that isn't in our bedroom?" Before he could respond, Emily appeared with her project materials. "I'm making a volcano." I forced a smile. Perfect timing. Daddy was just leaving for his evening meeting, wasn't he? Brian's jaw tightened. "Actually, I cancelled it. I thought we could have dinner as a family." "Like at the lake house?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Emily looked up from her volcano supplies. "Can Aunt Natalie come?" She knows all about volcanoes from when she took me to the science museum. The silence that followed felt like ground glass in my lungs. Brian stepped forward, his hand touching Emily's shoulder. "Hey kiddo, why don't you start setting up in the kitchen? Mom and I need to talk for a minute." After Emily left, Brian turned to me. "This has to stop. We're hurting her." "We?" My laugh sounded foreign, harsh. That's rich, coming from the man who's been playing happy families with my best friend. It's not that simple. $2,000 at Le Blanc is pretty simple. That bracelet from Tiffany's? Crystal clear. Tell me, did you take her there before or after you told me we couldn't afford Emily's summer camp? His phone buzzed. I caught a glimpse of Natalie's name before he quickly turned it face down. "Go ahead," I said. "Answer it. Tell her how inconvenient your wife is being about all this." "Sawyer, please." Greg's voice came from the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" We both turned. Greg stood there with a casserole dish, his expression carefully neutral. Emily bounced beside him, oblivious to the tension. "Uncle Greg's joining us for dinner," she announced. "He makes the best mac and cheese." Brian's face darkened. "When did you give him a key? When did you give Natalie our lake house key?" I countered. Greg cleared his throat. "Emily, why don't we get started on that volcano while your parents talk?" After they left, Brian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're letting him into our house now? While I'm at work? Worried about what might happen behind your back?" I met his gaze. "How that might feel?" His phone buzzed again. This time, I snatched it before he could react. The message preview glowed on the screen. "Baby, we need to talk." "He knows." "He knows?" I read aloud. "Who's he, Brian? Natalie's husband? Is your perfect little affair about to implode?" Brian grabbed for the phone, but I held tight. We struggled briefly until a small voice froze us both. "Stop it." Emily stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Greg appeared behind her, his expression grim. "Why are you fighting?" Emily sobbed. "Why is everything different now?" I released the phone, watching it clatter to the floor. The screen cracked, a spiderweb of fractures across Natalie's message. "Fitting, really." "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, but Emily was already running upstairs, her footsteps punctuated by the slam of her bedroom door. Greg touched my shoulder as he passed. "I'll talk to her." Left alone with Brian, I picked up his broken phone and handed it to him. "Congratulations. You've managed to break everything you touch." His response was cut off by another buzz, Natalie again, desperate for answers. But she'd have to wait. We all would. Because now I knew exactly what my next move would be. The private investigator's photos spread across Greg's kitchen table like a deck of cards dealt by the devil himself. Each image told its own story: Brian and Natalie entering hotels, sharing intimate dinners, shopping for jewelry. But it was the last photo that made my hands shake. They bought a house, Greg said quietly, pointing to the real estate document. Closing date is next month. I traced the address with my finger. 3 blocks from Emily's school. There's more. He slid over a financial report. They'd been moving money into a joint account for months. Your money, Sawyer. My phone buzzed, another message from Natalie: please meet me. I can explain everything. Don't, Greg warned, seeing my expression. Not until we're ready. The front door opened, and Emily's voice carried through. Mom? Uncle Greg? I quickly gathered the photos, but one slipped free, landing at Emily's feet as she entered. She picked it up before I could stop her. This is the house Daddy showed me. Her eyes lit up. He said it might be a surprise, but I wasn't supposed to tell. She stopped, reading something in my face. Mom? Greg smoothly took the photo. Hey kiddo, want to help me water the garden? Those new tomatoes need attention. After they left, I pulled out my phone and typed, Lake House. 1 hour. Sent it to both Brian and Natalie. Brian replied instantly, don't do this. Natalie, thank you. I'll be there. I drove to the lake house slowly, remembering weekends spent here with Emily, family barbecues. Girls' nights with Natalie where we'd shared our deepest secrets. Now every memory felt tainted, rewritten. They arrived separately, but within minutes of each other. Perfect timing, just like their affair. Sawyer, Natalie started, but I held up my hand. I saw the house listing, I said. Nice neighborhood. Good school district. Perfect for a fresh start, right? Brian stepped forward. We can explain. With my money? I pulled out the bank statements. The transfers, the secret account? Were you planning to tell me before or after you moved my daughter into your love nest? It's not like that, Natalie pleaded. We never meant. To get caught? To destroy everything? To make my daughter lie for you? Each question felt like glass in my throat. Which part wasn't meant to happen, Natalie? We love each other, Brian said quietly. It just happened. Love? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to make them both flinch. Love doesn't empty joint accounts. Love doesn't make a child keep secrets. Love doesn't. My phone rang, Greg's number. Emily found more photos, he said without preamble. She's asking questions. She's upset. The world tilted. I'm coming. Wait, Brian grabbed my arm. What photos? What have you been showing our daughter? I yanked free. Our daughter? You lost the right to say our when you planned to move her into a house you bought with stolen money and my former best friend. Sawyer, please, Natalie reached for me. We can work this out. For Emily's sake. Don't you dare use my daughter's name. I turned to Brian. You want a war? Fine. But remember, you started this when you made Emily part of your lies. What are you going to do? Brian's voice held a note of fear I'd never heard before. I walked to my car, then turned back. You know what's funny? I was going to be reasonable. Split everything 50-50, keep things civil. But now? I smiled, and they both took a step back. Now I'm going to take everything. The house, the accounts, full custody. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if Emily remembers your names. You can't, Brian started. Watch me. I got in my car. Oh, and that house you're buying? Better check the title. My lawyer put a freeze on all our assets this morning. Enjoy explaining that to your realtor. As I drove away, I watched them in my rearview mirror, 2 figures growing smaller. Standing in front of the lake house where my marriage had died long before I knew it was sick. Greg was right. Timing was everything. And my time for being understanding was over. Natalie's husband opened the door, his face drawn with confusion. Sawyer? What are you? Ask your wife about the Tiffany bracelet, I said, pushing past him into their perfect house with its perfect family photos. Ask her about the lake house visits. What's going on? Natalie appeared at the top of the stairs, freezing when she saw me. The bracelet, Brian's gift, glinted on her wrist. Show him, I said, tossing the manila envelope onto their pristine coffee table. Or I will. Natalie descended slowly, like a condemned woman approaching the gallows. Mark, I can explain. Explain what? He reached for the envelope. Nat? My phone buzzed. Brian, stop this. You're destroying lives. I typed back, you started the destruction. I'm just finishing it. The sounds of Mark flipping through photos filled the room. Each sharp intake of breath, each muttered curse marked another nail in the coffin of Natalie's marriage. The bracelet caught the light again as she wrung her hands. 8 months, I said into the silence. 8 months of lies, while I worked hospital shifts. While our daughters had playdates. While we had wine nights and you pretended to be my friend. Mark's voice cracked. The house listing. That's why you've been pushing to move. I'm sorry, Natalie whispered, but I couldn't tell which of us she was talking to. My phone rang, Greg's number. Emily's asking to speak to Brian, he said when I answered. She's crying. Says she found texts on his iPad. The room tilted. What texts? Messages about running away together. Taking Emily with them. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the hardwood floor. Natalie took a step toward me, concern crossing her face. Sawyer? You were going to take my daughter? The words came out raw, barely human. That house near her school, you were planning to. It wasn't like that, Natalie reached for me. We just wanted. What you wanted? I knocked her hand away. What about what Emily wants? What about her life, her friends, her stability? Mark stood, photos scattering at his feet. Get out. Natalie turned to him. Mark, please. Get out. He pointed to the door. Pack a bag and leave. Now. My phone buzzed again. Brian, Emily needs me. I'm coming over. No, I typed back. Stay away from her. Another text appeared, you can't keep me from my daughter. Watch me, I replied, then blocked his number. Natalie's sobs echoed through the house as she climbed the stairs. Mark picked up one of the photos, Brian and Natalie at the lake house, Emily between them like some twisted family portrait. I trusted you with my daughter, I said to Natalie's retreating back. With my marriage. With everything. She paused on the stairs. We never meant to hurt anyone. We fell in love. Love? Mark's laugh was bitter. Love doesn't plot to kidnap children. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, Brian using a different phone, lawyers called. Joint custody arrangement being filed tomorrow. You can't stop this. The room spun. I grabbed the doorframe for support, my vision blurring. Everything I'd built, everything I'd protected, was crumbling. They'd take Emily. They'd win. Sawyer? Mark's voice seemed distant. Are you okay? I straightened, forcing air into my lungs. No. But I will be. I left them there, Mark with his scattered photos, Natalie crying upstairs, their perfect life in pieces. In my car, another text waited from the unknown number, you started this war. Don't be surprised when you lose everything. My hand shook as I started the engine. They wanted a war? Fine. But they'd forgotten something crucial, I had nothing left to lose. And people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous of all. I pulled away from Natalie's house, already dialing my lawyer. It was time to show them exactly what destruction really looked like. Because if they wanted to take my daughter, they'd have to go through me first. And I was done playing nice. The courthouse hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Brian and Natalie stood at the far end, heads bent together, while their lawyers shuffled papers. My own attorney squeezed my arm. "Remember, stay calm. We have the evidence." Emily sat on a bench between us and them, drawing in her sketchbook. The same sketchbook that had first revealed their betrayal. 10 minutes until the hearing, my lawyer whispered. "Are you ready?" Before I could answer, Brian approached, his face tight. "We need to talk. Alone." I followed him to an alcove, maintaining careful distance. He looked expensive in his new suit, probably bought with our money. "I'm ending it with Natalie," he said quietly. The words hit like a slap. "What?" "It was a mistake. All of it." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'll sign whatever you want. Full custody, the house, everything. Just stop this." "Stop what?" "The truth? The destruction. You've ruined her marriage, her reputation." "I ruined nothing," I cut in. "You did that when you decided to play house with my best friend." Emily's voice carried down the hallway. "Aunt Natalie, why are you crying?" We both turned. Natalie knelt beside Emily, mascara tracking down her cheeks. The Tiffany bracelet still glinted on her wrist. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Natalie was saying. "Big ones. Like the house?" Emily asked. "The one you and Daddy were going to surprise Mom with?" Brian stiffened beside me. "Emily, honey." "Show her," I said suddenly. "Show our daughter the truth about that house." "Sawyer, don't." I walked to Emily, pulling out my phone. "Remember that drawing you found? The one with Daddy and Aunt Natalie? Look at this." The real estate listing glowed on the screen. Emily's eyes widened. "But where's my room? You said I'd have a bigger room." "There was never going to be a room for you," I said softly. "This was their house. Their new life. Without us. That's enough." Brian grabbed for the phone, but I held firm. "No more lies," I hissed. "No more pretending." Natalie stood, swaying slightly. "I can't do this." All eyes turned to her. She pulled off the bracelet, letting it fall to the floor with a metallic ring. "I was pregnant," she said. The hallway went silent. Brian's face drained of color. He whispered. "Last month. I lost it." Her laugh was hollow. "The day Sawyer went to the hospital. I was going to tell you, but then everything happened so fast." The world tilted. My hospitalization. Their distraction. The pieces clicked into horrible place. "You were with her," I said to Brian. "When I called you from the emergency room. When I needed you." He stepped toward Natalie, but she backed away. "Don't. Just don't." "All rise," the bailiff called. "Family court is now in session." Emily grabbed my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Mom? I don't want to go with them. Please don't make me go with them." Brian's lawyer approached with papers. "Mr. Sanders has agreed to full custody and asset division in your favor, Mrs. Sanders. If you'll just sign." "Wait," Brian interrupted. "Natalie, we need to talk about." "No." She gathered her purse, backing away. "We need to stop talking. Stop destroying everything we touch." She turned to me. "I'm sorry, Sawyer. For everything. You'll never see me again." She fled down the hallway, leaving Brian staring after her, the custody papers trembling in his hands. My lawyer touched my shoulder. "The judge is waiting. What do you want to do?" I looked at Emily, at Brian's shattered expression, at the discarded bracelet gleaming under fluorescent lights. The revenge I'd craved suddenly tasted like ash. Give me the papers. Sometimes winning feels exactly like losing. But as I signed my name as Emily hugged me tight, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about saving ourselves. Let's go home, baby, I whispered to Emily. Just us. We left Brian there, surrounded by the wreckage of 2 marriages and a future that would never be. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. But maybe they can be survived. The lake house key felt heavy in my palm as I stood on the dock where everything had ended. Emily splashed in the shallows with Greg's kids while he packed up the last of our belongings. Found this in Brian's desk, Greg said, approaching with a sealed envelope. It's dated before everything. I turned the envelope over, recognizing Brian's handwriting. For Sawyer, when I'm brave enough. You don't have to read it, Greg offered. But I did. Because some questions deserve answers, even if they hurt. Inside was a confession, written months before I discovered the affair. Brian describing his guilt, his plans to end things with Natalie, his fear of losing Emily. At the bottom, a single line, by the time you read this, I hope I've found the courage to choose our family. Mom. Emily called from the water. Watch this. I tucked the letter away, clapping as she demonstrated her newest swimming trick. Her smile came easier now, the shadows lifting from her eyes. My phone buzzed, a text from Mark, Natalie's ex-husband, thought you should know. She's moving to Seattle. Signed the divorce papers yesterday. Another buzz, Brian, the house sale closes tomorrow. Your lawyer will have the proceeds by Friday. I deleted both messages without responding. Some chapters need to stay closed. Greg joined me on the dock. Ready to burn it? I pulled out the box we'd prepared, photos, letters, Emily's drawings of their secret family. All the evidence I'd gathered from my revenge, now just toxic memories. Wait, Emily said, climbing onto the dock. Can I add something? She pulled out the bracelet, Natalie's Tiffany bracelet. Daddy left it in my room. Said it was worth a lot of money and I could keep it. My hands clenched. One final manipulation, using our daughter as a pawn. What do you want to do with it? I asked her. She dropped it in the box. Burn it. I don't want their presence. Greg handed her a match. Together, we watched the flames consume the past. The photos curled and blackened. The bracelet's silver surface tarnished in the heat. Feel better? Greg asked softly. Not better, I replied. Different. Emily leaned against me, wet bathing suit soaking my shirt. Can we still come to the lake sometimes? Of course. But not this lake. I pulled out a real estate listing on my phone. How about this one? Her eyes widened at the small cottage pictured on the screen. Our own lake house? If you want. Just us. And Uncle Greg and the kids sometimes? Greg coughed, looking away. I felt my cheeks warm. Maybe. If they want. The box finished burning, leaving only ashes and twisted metal. Emily picked up a stick, stirring the remains. Mom? Are you still mad at Daddy? I watched the last ember die. No, baby. I'm not mad anymore. Just different, she finished. Yeah. Different. Greg's kids called Emily back to the water. Before she ran to join them, she hugged me tight. I like different, she whispered. I watched her splash away, then turned to Greg. Thank you. For everything. He smiled, reaching for my hand. Ready to go? I looked at the lake one last time. Somewhere across these waters, Brian and Natalie were living with their choices. Their guilt. Their consequences. But here, on this dock, I was choosing to. Choosing to let revenge burn away with those photos. Choosing to build something new from the ashes. I dropped the lake house key into the water, watching it sink into the depths. Yeah, I said, squeezing Greg's hand. I'm ready. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. It's about building something they can never touch. Something different. Something stronger. Something yours. Emily's laughter echoed across the water, free and unburdened. And for the first time since everything broke, I felt truly, completely whole. Different, but whole. My name's Daisy, and this is the story of how I learned that family isn't always blood, and sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise to my parents, fresh out of college with stars in their eyes and careers on their minds. When my mom found out she was pregnant, she wanted an abortion. It wasn't the right time, they weren't ready, all that jazz. But my grandparents had other ideas. See, they were loaded, and they'd been bankrolling my parents' lives. When they caught wind of the pregnancy, they laid down the law: have the baby, or kiss the gravy train goodbye. From day one, I was an afterthought. My mom couldn't wait to get back to work, leaving me with a revolving door of nannies and my grandmothers. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the care they gave me, but it wasn't the same as having real parents. As I grew older, my grandparents started to back off. They'd done their duty, keeping me alive and all, and now they were off to enjoy their golden years in exotic locales. Can't blame them, I guess. But it left me even more alone. By the time I was 7, I was practically raising myself. I knew how to cook basic meals, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. It wasn't ideal, but it was my normal. Then, everything changed. My mom got pregnant again. This time, it was different. My parents were ready, excited even. They'd climbed the corporate ladder, made names for themselves. Now they could afford to be parents, or so they thought. When my sister was born, it was like the sun had finally risen in our house. My parents were over the moon, cooing and fawning over her like she was made of gold. And I was pushed even further into the shadows. As the years went by, the difference in how we were treated became more and more obvious. My sister got the best of everything: toys, clothes, attention. If she wanted something, she got it. If she did something wrong, it was brushed off with a laugh and a kids will be kids. Me? I learned not to ask for things. I wore hand-me-downs and made do with what I had. If I screwed up, it was met with disappointment and lectures about responsibility. Don't get me wrong, we weren't poor. Far from it. My parents were doing well, really well. But in their eyes, I was already grown, already independent. Why waste money on me when my sister needed it more? I threw myself into my studies. If I couldn't have their love, I'd have their respect. I got top grades, joined every club I could, stayed out of trouble. But it was never enough. They'd nod absently when I showed them my report card, then turn back to my sister's finger-painting masterpiece. By the time high school rolled around, I was counting the days until I could leave. I applied to colleges in secret, not telling my parents until I'd already been accepted. When I finally got into one of the best colleges, I packed my bags and left without a word. It took them 3 days to notice I was gone. 3 whole days. And even then, it was only because my mom wanted some yogurt. When she called, her voice was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "Daisy, could you pick up some low-calorie yogurt from the health food store on your way home?" I almost laughed. Here I was, starting a new chapter of my life, and all she cared about was yogurt. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not at home. I've been at college for 3 days now. I'm living in the dorms." There was a moment of silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to process this information. Then, without a hint of remorse or concern, she said, "Oh. Well, if you come back, you'll have to stay at a hotel. We've given your room to your sister." Life at college was a breath of fresh air. But money was tight. My parents didn't offer any financial support. But my grandparents, bless their hearts, came through for me. They sent me small amounts regularly, just enough to keep me afloat. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to me. Not just the money, but the fact that someone in my family actually cared. "Daisy, dear," my grandmother would say during our infrequent phone calls, "we're so proud of you. You focus on your studies, all right? Don't worry about anything else." Those words were like a balm to my soul. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined not to let them down. I couldn't work part-time like many of my classmates, the course load was too heavy, and I was determined to excel. So I pinched pennies, lived on ramen more often than not, and made every cent count. Meanwhile, life back home continued without me. My sister, the golden child, was struggling in school. Not that it mattered to my parents, they hired the best tutors money could buy, showered her with rewards for the slightest improvement, and made excuses for her every failure. By my senior year, companies were already lining up to recruit me. My professors sang my praises, my resume was impeccable, and I had my pick of job offers. But none of them felt quite right. I wanted more. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe, just maybe, to my family, that I could make it on my own terms. So I took a leap of faith. I applied to a prestigious international company in Europe. It was a long shot, but I figured I had nothing to lose. When the acceptance email came, I nearly fell out of my chair. This was it. My ticket to a new life, a fresh start. I graduated with honors, my grandparents beaming proudly in the audience. My parents? They sent a generic congratulations card. My sister didn't even bother with that. But I didn't care. I was beyond seeking their approval. As I packed my bags for Europe, I thought about calling my parents to say goodbye. In the end, I decided against it. What was there to say? They'd made it clear where I stood in their lives. Instead, I hugged my grandparents tight, promising to call and write often. Life in Europe was everything I'd hoped for and more. Every now and then, I'd call my parents. Old habits die hard, I guess. But each conversation was like pulling teeth. They'd give monosyllabic answers, always too busy or too distracted to really talk. And they never, not once, called me. Then I met Marco. He was in the marketing department, all charm and quick wit, with a smile that could light up a room. We started as colleagues, became friends, and before I knew it, we were falling in love. When Marco proposed on a moonlit beach in Positano, I didn't hesitate. We decided to have the wedding in Italy. "We should go tell your parents in person," Marco said one night as we pored over wedding plans. "And invite them properly. It's the right thing to do." So we flew back to the States, armed with wedding invitations and hope. Foolish hope, as it turned out. From the moment we walked into my childhood home, it was clear we weren't welcome. My parents were cold, distracted. They barely looked at Marco, barely acknowledged our news. "Oh, that's nice," my mother said, her eyes on her phone. "We're terribly busy though. Your sister's new apartment needs work, and we're overseeing the renovations." We stayed for a week. A long, uncomfortable week. My parents were hardly ever home, always at my sister's new place. But my sister? She was always around, always watching, always there. I saw the way she looked at Marco. The flutter of her eyelashes, the coy smiles. It made my stomach churn. "Marco," she cooed one evening, "I'd love your opinion on the color scheme for my bedroom. Why don't you come up and take a look?" I saw the discomfort on Marco's face. "I don't think," he started, but I cut him off. "That's enough," I snapped at my sister. "He's my fiancé. Back off." Her face crumpled into a pout. "I was just being friendly," she whined. "God, Daisy, you're so selfish. You always want everything for yourself." She stormed off, no doubt to cry to our parents. And sure enough, not 10 minutes later, my mother was there, face like thunder. "How dare you speak to your sister that way," she hissed. "After all we've done for you." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "All you've done for me? That's a joke, right? You've done nothing but ignore me my entire life." But it was useless. In their eyes, I was always going to be the villain. The unwanted child who dared to want more. That night, as Marco and I lay in bed in a nearby hotel, because of course, my old room was now a home gym for my sister, I made a decision. "Let's go home," I said softly. "Back to Italy. This isn't my home anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." Marco pulled me close, his warmth a comfort in the cold reality of my family's indifference. "Okay," he said simply. "Let's go home." As we boarded the plane the next day, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief to be leaving the toxicity behind, sadness for the family I never really had. Back in Italy, life slowly returned to normal. Marco and I threw ourselves into wedding planning, determined to create the perfect day. But the visit home had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of all I'd left behind. "Are you sure about this?" Marco asked one evening as we sat on our balcony, the sun setting over the Tuscan hills. "Not inviting your sister, I mean." I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll over my tongue before answering. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said finally. "After what happened. I can't have her there, Marco. I won't." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. What I didn't tell him was about the messages. The explicit, inappropriate messages my sister had been sending him on social media since we'd left. I'd seen them by accident one day when using his phone. He'd been too embarrassed, too kind to tell me. But I knew. And it was the final straw. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, venue visits, and dress fittings. Before I knew it, we were just weeks away from the big day. There was just one last thing to do. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed the number I still knew by heart, even after all these years. "Oh, Daisy, what is it?" "We're rather busy at the moment." My mother's voice, distracted as always. I swallowed hard, pushing down the hurt. "I'm calling about the wedding. I booked your flights and hotel. Everything's paid for. We'd love for you and Dad to come." There was a pause, then, "That's nice, dear. But what about your sister? We haven't received an invitation for her." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "She's not invited, Mom. After what happened during our visit, and the messages she's been sending Marco. I don't want her there." "Messages? What messages?" My mother's voice had an edge to it now. "The explicit ones, Mom. The ones she's been sending my fiancé. It's inappropriate and disrespectful. I won't have that drama at my wedding." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head, trying to find a way to excuse my sister's behavior, to make me the bad guy once again. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your sister would never do such a thing. Daisy, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first. You and Dad are welcome to come. The flight details will be emailed to you. I hope you'll be there." She didn't say anything and just hung up. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Everything was perfect, the flowers, the music, the food. Everything except for the 2 empty seats in the front row. As the hours ticked by and guests began to arrive, a knot formed in my stomach. Where were they? Surely they couldn't do that to me. "Marco," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Can we delay the ceremony a bit? I need to make a call." His eyes filled with understanding and sympathy. "Of course, amore. Take all the time you need." With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to give up, there was a click. "Hello?" My mother's voice, groggy and irritated. "Mom, where are you? The wedding's about to start." There was a pause, then, "Daisy, do you have any idea what time it is here?" "We were sleeping. It's the middle of the night." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Sleeping? But the wedding. You were supposed to be here. I sent you the tickets, the hotel information. Everything. Oh, that. Her voice turned cold. Well, we decided not to come. Your sister is having her housewarming party today. We couldn't miss that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her housewarming? But she's known about my wedding date for months. Why would she schedule it for today? Don't be selfish, Daisy. The world doesn't revolve around you. Besides, how could you expect us to go to one daughter's celebration and not the others? If you had invited your sister like you should have. Mom, I cut her off, my voice hard. You know why I didn't invite her. After what she did. That's all in your head, Daisy. Your sister would never do such a thing. You've always been jealous of her, always trying to make her look bad. I laughed, a bitter sound. Jealous? Is that what you think this is about? God, Mom, do you even hear yourself? Don't take that tone with me, young lady. This is your own fault. Your sister's party is none of my business, I finished for her. Just like my wedding is clearly none of yours. Goodbye, Mom. Enjoy the party. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and made a decision. And so, I walked down the aisle alone. No father to give me away, no mother to shed a tear. But as I looked at Marco, standing there with love shining in his eyes, I realized I didn't need them. I had everything I needed right here. Time has a way of healing wounds, or at least numbing them. Marco and I built a life together, full of love, laughter, and success. We'd both climbed the corporate ladder, our hard work paying off in promotions and accolades. We traveled, we made friends, we created a home. My parents never reached out. No congratulations on our wedding, no holiday greetings, nothing. And after a while, I stopped expecting them to. I stopped checking my phone on my birthday, stopped hoping for a Christmas card. It was easier that way. Then, on a random Tuesday in April, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a very familiar area code. My hometown. Hello? I answered, my heart pounding. Daisy, is that you? My mother's voice, sounding older, more tired than I remembered. Daisy, we need your help. And so the story came out. The company my parents had worked for, the one they'd sacrificed everything for, including their relationship with me, had gone bankrupt. They were out of work, with no savings to fall back on. We've always lived well, you know that, my mother said, a note of desperation in her voice. We know we haven't been good parents to you. But we need help, please. I closed my eyes, conflicting emotions warring inside me. Anger at their past treatment, satisfaction at their comeuppance, pity for their situation, and a small, traitorous spark of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment they'd finally see me, value me. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. How much do you need? The figure she named made me wince, but I could afford it. Marco and I had done well for ourselves, after all. I made the transfer immediately, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. It's done, I told her. The money should be in your account soon. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. Text messages would arrive, always asking for money. The amounts were smaller now, but the requests were frequent. And every time, like a fool, I sent the money. After one such transaction, Marco found me staring at my phone, a wry smile on my face. They asked for money again, he asked gently. I nodded. And again, I sent it. God, when did I become such a sucker? Marco sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You're not a sucker, amore. You're kind. It's not your fault they can't see what an amazing daughter they have. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world tilted on its axis once again. I was idly scrolling through Facebook, a cup of coffee in hand, when a photo stopped me cold. My parents, looking tanned and relaxed, cocktails in hand, lounging by a pool at what was clearly a very expensive resort. My hand shook as I clicked through more photos. There they were, dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. posing in front of a luxury spa. Living it up like they didn't have a care in the world. Like they hadn't been begging me for money for months. With a growing sense of dread, I navigated to my sister's page. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Photo after photo of her with a brand new sports car, at high-end bars, designer shopping bags piled around her. And the captions. Another amazing gift from the best parents in the world. Lucky me, only child. So blessed to have parents who would do anything for me. Spoiled and proud. And there, in the comments, were my parents. Liking every post. Commenting things like, nothing but the best for our little princess, and you deserve it all, sweetheart. I felt sick. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. How could they? How dare they? As if on cue, my phone started ringing. It was them. With a deep breath, I answered. Daisy, dear, my mother's voice dripped with fake sweetness. We were wondering when you might be sending the next transfer. Life's been so hard, you know. We're thinking of renovating the house, it's gotten so old and dreary. Something in me snapped. Hard? I've seen the photos, Mom. The resort, the restaurants, the gifts for my sister. How dare you? There was a pause, then my mother's voice turned cold. Now you listen here, we gave you life. I could have had an abortion, you know. But we chose to have you. You owe us everything. Now, about that money. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, my whole body shaking with rage and hurt. The phone immediately started ringing again. And again, and again. Text messages flooded in, alternating between guilt trips and demands. I turned the phone off. Over the next few weeks, my parents continued to call and message. Demanding money, then pleading, then threatening. I ignored it all. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, cut off every avenue they had to reach me. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of guilt. But every time I wavered, I remembered those photos, those comments. The cruel words my mother had spat at me. Years passed, and life continued to evolve. Marco and I had built a successful life in Europe, but something was calling us back to the States. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was the desire to start a family of our own in familiar surroundings. Whatever the reason, we made the decision to return to my hometown. We quickly settled into our new life. A quaint house in a quiet neighborhood, prestigious jobs that challenged and excited us, and plans for the family we hoped to start soon. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. One afternoon, while having coffee with an old school friend, I learned about the dramatic turn of events in my estranged family's life. Did you hear about your sister's party? My friend asked, her eyes wide with gossip. I shook my head, bracing myself for whatever came next. It was wild, she continued. After everyone left, she fell asleep while smoking in bed. The whole house went up in flames. Your sister made it out, but the house, it's gone, Daisy. Completely destroyed. I sat there, stunned. The house I grew up in, the site of so many conflicting memories, reduced to ashes because of my sister's carelessness. That's not even the worst part, my friend added. Turns out your parents let the insurance lapse. They've lost everything. A part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt for feeling that way. But mostly, I felt nothing. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. Life went on. Marco and I focused on our careers, our home, our future. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, a knock on the door changed everything. I opened it to find my parents standing there. They looked older, worn down. The designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair were gone, replaced by shabby, outdated outfits and graying, unkempt locks. Daisy, my mother said, her voice trembling. We need your help. I stood there, frozen, as they poured out their tale of woe. Living in a cramped, rented apartment. Struggling to make ends meet. No savings, no support from their own parents, unable to find work at their age. "And your sister," my father added, his voice bitter. "We asked to stay with her, in the apartment we bought her. She kicked us out. Said she didn't have room for old people." A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The golden child, turning on them just as they had turned on me. But the laugh died in my throat as I looked at their desperate faces. "Please, Daisy," my mother pleaded. "We have nowhere else to go. You're our only hope." For a moment, I was tempted. The little girl inside me, the one who had always craved their love and approval, wanted to throw open the door and welcome them in. But then, "You owe us this," my mother said, her tone shifting from pleading to demanding. "After all, I could have aborted you. You owe us your life." And just like that, the spell was broken. I felt a calm settle over me, a certainty I had never known before. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I don't owe you anything. Not for giving birth to me, not for the years of neglect, not for choosing my sister over me time and time again. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Now, I'm asking you to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police." My father tried to step forward, but I stood my ground. "I mean it," I said. "Leave. Now. And don't come back." They left, hurling insults and threats as they went. I closed the door, leaning against it as tears finally came. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of relief. Of closure. That night, I called my grandparents. They had always been there for me, even from a distance. They listened as I poured out the whole story, offering words of comfort and support. "You did the right thing, Daisy," my grandmother said. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Especially those who wouldn't even notice if you burned." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The last ties to my toxic past had been severed. The future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibility. So, I've always been the weird one in my family. You know, the black sheep and all that. I'm Ella Thompson, 29 years old now, but I felt like I don't fit in for pretty much forever. Growing up, I was the oldest kid of doctors Margaret and Robert Thompson. Yeah, my parents were big shots, but none of that good stuff ever really came my way. Nah, all the perks went to my younger twin brothers, Jack and Oliver. From the second those two popped out, it was like I became invisible to my parents. It started off small, you know? They'd get a bigger piece of cake or a new toy. But as we got older, it got way worse and super obvious. I remember when I turned 10. I'd been dropping hints for ages about this art set I saw in a shop window. Nothing crazy, just a basic kit with some decent paints and brushes. When my birthday rolled around, I was so pumped to open my one present, and what do I find? A freaking math workbook. When I hit my teenage years, the favoritism got even more in your face. Family trips were all about what the boys wanted. If Jack felt like skiing, boom, we're off to the slopes. If Oliver was into surfing that year, hello beach vacation. My ideas? Always got shot down or ignored. College applications. Man, that's a touchy subject. When I was 17, I fell in love with art restoration. I'd hang out at the local museum for hours, bugging the staff with questions about how they fixed up old art. When I brought up studying art restoration in college, you'd think I'd said I wanted to join the circus or something. Art restoration? Mom laughed. Ella, get real. That's not a proper job. Yeah, Ella, Jack butted in with this smug look. Why don't you do something useful, like become a doctor? I'll never forget how proud my parents looked when Jack said that. It was a look I'd never seen them give me. Even though they didn't have my back, I was determined to make it happen. When college acceptance letters started showing up, I was over the moon to find out I'd scored a scholarship to study art restoration. I remember running into the kitchen, waving the letter around like a crazy person. Mom, Dad, I got a scholarship. Mom barely looked up from her medical journal. That's nice, honey. Did you hear the boys got perfect scores on their sets? The day I left for college was so different from when the twins would leave 2 years later. I packed up my second-hand laptop and thrift store clothes, getting ready to take the bus to my not-so-fancy state school. My parents were too caught up in their work to even give me a ride to the bus station. But there was one person who actually saw me for who I was. My grandma, Elizabeth. She showed up that day, and right before I was about to leave, she pulled me aside. "Ella, sweetie," she said, pushing a small envelope into my hand. "I'm so proud of you. Don't ever forget that." Inside the envelope was a check, not enough to change my whole life, but enough to make things a bit easier. But more than the money, it was the fact that she actually noticed me that meant everything. So, college was kind of a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I was finally free from always being compared to Jack and Oliver. I could really dive into my studies without feeling like I was in some weird competition for attention. But on the other hand, money was tight. Like, really tight. While I was barely getting by on my scholarship and working part-time jobs, I'd hear about all the fancy stuff my brothers were up to through family calls and social media. Fancy frat parties, spring break trips to crazy places, internships at big-shot hospitals, all paid for by our parents, of course. Time went by, and I threw myself into my studies like crazy. Art restoration became more than just what I wanted to do for a job, it was my escape, my happy place. There was something really satisfying about bringing beauty back to old, forgotten pieces, about showing the hidden potential under layers of neglect and damage. In my last year, I scored an internship at this small but respected museum. It wasn't fancy work, mostly cleaning and organizing stuff, but it was a way in. I was over the moon. When I called home to share the news, my mother's response was exactly what I expected, lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, sounding distracted. "Did you hear about Jack's research paper? It's being published in a major medical journal." I held back a sigh. "That's great, Mom. Listen, I was thinking of coming home for a weekend soon. Maybe we could." "Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea," she cut me off quick. "Your father and I are going to be really busy. We're helping the boys with their research papers. You understand, right?" As I hung up the phone, I felt that familiar mix of anger and hurt building up in my chest. But this time, there was something else too. A little spark of defiance, of determination. I looked around my tiny dorm room, at the art books piled up on my desk, at the half-finished restoration project taking up most of my floor. This was my world now, one I had built for myself despite everything. "Screw them," I muttered to the empty room. "I don't need their approval." But even as I said it, a part of me knew it wasn't true. As much as I tried to deny it, a small part of me still wanted my parents to recognize me, still hoped that one day they'd see me for who I really was. So, graduation day came and went without much fuss from my family. My big moment was marked by a quick dinner at some chain restaurant. "So, Ella, what's next?" Dad asked, barely looking up from his menu. I sat up straight, trying to sound confident. "I actually got a job offer, in one of the museums in New York." Dad frowned. "I don't know, Ella. New York is expensive. How much does this job pay?" I felt my face get hot as I mumbled the not-so-impressive starting salary. The disappointment on their faces was super obvious. The rest of the dinner was a blur of thinly veiled criticism and comparisons to Jack and Oliver's academic awesomeness. As we were leaving the restaurant, Grandma Elizabeth pulled me aside. "Don't let them dim your light, my dear," she whispered, pressing a small envelope into my hand. "Go to New York. Chase your dreams." Inside the envelope was a check, enough to cover my first month's rent in the city. I hugged her tight, trying not to cry. The next few years were crazy. I threw myself into my work, slowly but surely making a name for myself in the world of art restoration. It was during this time that I met Noah. Noah was a struggling graphic designer with a nice smile and this infectious passion for his work. We clicked right away over our shared love of art and our experiences as underdogs in our fields. After dating for a while, I decided it was time for Noah to meet my family. From the second we sat down, it was clear my parents had other ideas. They bombarded Noah with questions, each one more pointed than the last. "So, Noah," Dad started, trying to sound casual but failing, "what exactly are your long-term career prospects?" Noah shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I'm building my client base. It takes time, but I'm making progress." Mom jumped in. "And your current income? Is it enough to support a family?" I felt my face get hot. "Mom, that's not." "It's okay, Ella," Noah said, squeezing my hand under the table. "I'm not where I want to be money-wise yet, Dr. Thompson, but I'm working hard to get there." The interrogation kept going throughout dinner. With each question, I could see Noah's confidence taking a hit, and my own anger rising. As we were leaving, Mom pulled me aside. "Ella, honey, I know you think you care for this boy, but you need to be realistic. You've already chosen a challenging career path. Don't make it worse by attaching yourself to someone with no real future." "Mom," I hissed, shocked at how blunt she was being. Dad joined in. "Your mother's right, Ella. You need to think about your future. This Noah seems nice enough, but is he really good enough for you? You could do so much better." I stood there, speechless, as years of pent-up frustration threatened to explode. How dare they judge Noah? How dare they once again dismiss my choices? So, as Noah and I started planning our wedding, reality hit us hard. Our combined savings were pretty pathetic, barely enough for a simple ceremony. One night, after staring at budget spreadsheets for hours, I decided to bring it up with my parents. Maybe they'd want to chip in. "Mom, Dad," I started hesitantly during our weekly phone call. "Noah and I have set a date for the wedding. We're trying to keep costs down, but I was wondering if maybe you'd like to help out a little? Even just with the planning?" The silence on the other end of the line was so long and awkward. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice cold as ice. "Ella, you're an adult now. If you've chosen to marry this person, then you need to handle the consequences yourself." I hung up feeling like crap, but not really surprised. Once again, Grandma Elizabeth swooped in to save the day. When I told her about the situation, she didn't hesitate to help. "My dear," she said, her voice warm over the phone, "I may not be able to give you the wedding of your dreams, but I want to help make your day special." She sent over some money that, while not a ton, made a huge difference to our plans. The wedding day arrived, and I had this mix of excitement and nerves churning in my stomach. The community center we'd rented was simple, but looked nice, decorated with wildflowers and twinkly lights. Our small group of friends had pitched in, helping with everything from the decorations to the homemade cake. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, Noah's face lit up with a smile that made all the struggle worth it. For a moment, I forgot about everything else, the money stress, my family being jerks, and just soaked in the love radiating from his eyes. The bubble burst as soon as I caught sight of my family. Mom and Dad sat stiffly in the front row, looking bored and disgusted. I overheard Mom muttering to Dad about the tacky decorations and cheap food. Jack and Oliver were even worse, snickering in the corner and constantly on their phones. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on our vows and the supportive faces of our friends. It wasn't until the next day that I realized just how cruel they could be. I woke up to a ton of notifications on my phone. Jack and Oliver had gone on social media, posting a bunch of unflattering photos from the wedding. "Congrats to our big sis on her special day," read one caption under a blurry photo of Noah and me cutting our homemade cake. "Nothing says true love like a dollar store wedding." Another post showed a picture of the buffet table next to a photo of a fancy meal from some high-end restaurant. Ella's wedding versus our average Tuesday lunch. Guess which one's which? The comments section was a war zone. Some relatives were shocked at the brothers' behavior. "This is completely unacceptable. You should be ashamed of yourselves," wrote Aunt Sarah. But others seemed to think it was funny. Savage but true. "That wedding looked like a homeless convention," commented our cousin Tim. I felt sick reading through the comments. But what really broke my heart was seeing my parents' responses. Instead of telling their sons off, they were actually encouraging them. Mom had commented, "Boys will be boys. It's just a bit of harmless fun." I didn't call them and demand an apology. I just decided to forget about them for a while. So, 6 months after our wedding, it was time for the annual Thompson family reunion. Even though I was worried about it, Noah thought I should go, hoping it might be a chance to clear the air. Man, were we wrong. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I managed to keep it together for the first hour, making polite conversation and avoiding my immediate family as much as I could. But then I overheard Jack bragging about his latest fancy vacation, paid for by our parents, of course. Something inside me just snapped. "Must be nice," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "To have mommy and daddy bankroll your entire life." The room went dead quiet. Jack stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," I shot back, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "You and Oliver have been handed everything on a silver platter, while I've had to fight for every scrap of recognition or support." Mom stepped forward, her face red with anger. "Now, Ella, you're being ridiculous. We've always treated you children equally." I let out a bitter laugh. "Equally? Are you kidding me? Let's talk about equal, shall we?" I started counting off on my fingers. Private school tuition for the boys, public school for me. Brand new cars for their 16th birthdays, nothing for mine. And let's not forget the crowning achievement, $300,000 for their Ivy League medical educations, while I had to scrape by on scholarships and loans. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, all eyes on our family's dirty laundry being aired so publicly. Mom's voice was ice cold when she spoke. "If you're so obsessed with money, Ella, perhaps you should have married someone rich instead of your poor husband." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Noah, who had been silently supporting me, stiffened beside me. "How dare you?" I hissed, feeling tears in my eyes. "Noah is worth 10 of you. He actually loves me for who I am, not for how I can make him look good to his country club friends." The reunion turned into total chaos. Everyone was throwing accusations, bringing up old grudges, and years of resentment came pouring out. In the middle of all the shouting, a strong voice cut through the noise. "Enough." Everyone turned to see Grandma Elizabeth standing up, her usually kind face looking stern and angry. "I have watched this family tear itself apart for years, and I won't stand for it anymore," she declared. "Margaret, Robert, your treatment of Ella has been shameful. And you boys," she turned to Jack and Oliver, "your cruelty towards your sister is unforgivable." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Mom, never one to back down, spat out, "Mother, you don't understand. Ella has always been difficult, always causing problems." "No, Margaret," Grandma interrupted. "The only problem here is your blatant favoritism and inability to see the damage you've done." I looked around the room, at the shocked faces of my relatives, at my grandmother's resolute stance, at my parents' anger, and my brother's smug expressions. In that moment, something inside me broke and then came back together differently. "I'm done," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done trying to win your approval, done trying to be part of this toxic family. Noah and I are leaving, and don't bother trying to contact us." The months that followed were tough. Noah was my rock through it all. He held me when the sadness hit, celebrated the small victories, and never once made me feel guilty for the family drama I'd brought into our lives. So, life has this weird way of throwing you for a loop when you least expect it. It all kicked off with a phone call. Noah had been working his butt off for weeks, putting everything he had into a pitch for this big-time client. When he answered the phone that sunny Tuesday morning, I could tell from the look on his face that something major had gone down. "We got it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ella, we got the contract." The next few months were crazy. Noah's little design firm blew up overnight, the fancy client opening doors we never thought we'd see. Suddenly, we weren't just scraping by, we were rolling in it. But with our new success came this unexpected complication. My phone started blowing up with notifications, friend requests from family members I'd long since blocked, messages from distant relatives suddenly wanting to catch up. And then, the call I'd been dreading. "Ella, sweetheart." My mother's voice, sickly sweet, came through the line. "We've heard the wonderful news about Noah's business. We always knew you two would make it." The bullshit kept coming. My father got on the line, talking about how proud they were, how they'd always believed in us. I listened in stunned silence, getting angrier with each lie. "We'd love to see you," Mom chirped. "Maybe we could all have dinner, celebrate your success as a family?" That snapped me out of it. "As a family?" I repeated, my voice hard. "We haven't been a family for a long time, and that's not going to change just because our bank account has." I stuck to my guns. When my parents showed up at our door out of the blue, I didn't let them in. When they sent fancy gifts, I sent them right back unopened. Instead, Noah and I focused on building the life we'd always wanted. We worked hard, saved smart, and eventually found ourselves signing the papers for a beautiful apartment right in the middle of the city. Excited to share our happiness, I posted a photo on social media. It was a simple shot, Noah and I, keys in hand, standing in front of our new home. Next to it was a picture from our most recent visit with Grandma Elizabeth, her proud smile beaming at the camera. "New beginnings and old love," I captioned it. "Grateful for those who've been there through it all. New home, family." As I hit post, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. This was my family now, Noah, Grandma Elizabeth, and the friends who had stood by us through thick and thin. We had built this life for ourselves, despite the odds, despite all the people who said we couldn't do it. The soft evening light was coming through the windows of our new apartment as I was busy in the kitchen, getting dinner ready for Noah and Grandma Elizabeth. It was our first real family dinner in our new place, and I wanted everything to be just right. The sudden, aggressive pounding on the front door shattered that peace in an instant. "Ella, open up. We know you're in there." My blood ran cold. I'd know those voices anywhere, Jack and Oliver. Before I could even react, the door burst open. My brothers stormed in, their faces twisted with anger. I barely had time to see Noah jumping to his feet before Jack was in my face, jabbing an accusing finger at my chest. "You manipulative little bitch," he snarled. "We always knew you were playing the long game, but this? This is low, even for you." I stumbled back, shocked by how much venom was in his voice. "What are you talking about?" Oliver laughed, and it was a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't play dumb, Ella. We saw your little social media post. Showing off your new apartment, posing with Grandma. You think we can't put two and two together?" It hit me what they were thinking. "You think Grandma bought us this apartment?" "We know she did," Jack spat. "You've been playing the poor, neglected child for years, worming your way into her good graces. And now you've manipulated her into making you the sole heir." I felt a surge of anger, straightening my spine. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Noah and I bought this apartment ourselves. With our own money, that we earned." Oliver sneered, his eyes darting around the room. "Right, sure you did. Where is the old bat anyway? Hiding her away so we can't talk sense into her? That crazy old woman should be in a cemetery by now. I can't wait for her to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and live it up." The room fell deadly silent. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined those horrific words. Then, a quiet voice spoke from the doorway of the guest room. "So this is how you truly feel about me." All heads turned to see Grandma Elizabeth standing there, her face a mask of shock and disappointment. The color drained from Jack and Oliver's faces as they realized their grandmother had heard every word. "Grandma," Jack stammered, we didn't mean." Elizabeth held up a hand, shutting him up. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I finally understand who truly values me and who sees me as nothing more than a meal ticket. I found my voice, strengthened by my grandmother's presence. I think you both need to leave. Now. For a moment, it looked like they might argue. But one look at Grandma's face, a mixture of hurt and resolve, seemed to deflate them. They slunk towards the door, muttering weak excuses. The aftermath of that crazy evening hit like a storm. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, constantly reminding me of the mess that had blown up. Mom's name popped up on the screen for what felt like the millionth time. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Ella, her voice was sharp, not sounding like a mom at all. You need to fix this. Your grandmother is furious with the boys. You need to smooth things over, tell her it was all a misunderstanding. I let out a bitter laugh. A misunderstanding? They broke into my home and said they couldn't wait for her to die so they could sell her house. How exactly is that a misunderstanding? They didn't mean it, Dad chimed in, apparently on speakerphone. You know how the boys can be. They were just upset. Upset about what? I challenged. That Noah and I bought an apartment with our own money? That Grandma loves me? Mom's voice turned sickly sweet. Sweetheart, we know you've always felt left out. But you need to think about what's best for the family. Your brothers deserve that inheritance. Don't be selfish. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. Selfish? You're calling me selfish? After years of favoritism, of dismissing my achievements, of treating Noah and me like second-class citizens? And now you have the audacity to demand I give up an inheritance I never even asked for? Now, Ella, Dad started, but I cut him off. No. I'm done. I'm done with the manipulation, the guilt trips, all of it. Don't call me again. Don't text. Don't show up at my door. We're through. Over the next few days, I blocked their numbers, along with Jack and Oliver's. It was painful, like cutting off a diseased limb, but necessary for healing to begin. As the dust settled, I found myself surrounded by a different kind of warmth. Grandma Elizabeth, now fully aware of the family dynamics she had long suspected, became an even more constant presence in our lives. Aunt Sarah, who had reached out after the wedding fiasco, became a regular visitor. I always knew you were special, Ella, she said, hugging me tightly. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. Other relatives, cousins, and distant aunts and uncles who had witnessed my family's mistreatment over the years, reached out with messages of support. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing genuine relationships to flourish where there had once been only obligation. Noah's family, bless them, wrapped me in a blanket of unconditional love. His parents, who had watched from the sidelines as my own family tore me down, went out of their way to make me feel cherished. Noah and I threw ourselves into making our new apartment a home. Each piece of furniture, each photo on the wall, was a testament to the life we were building together, a life founded on mutual respect, support, and love. My name's Robin, and I had just celebrated my 26th birthday a few weeks ago. Life was good. I was engaged to Jake, my college sweetheart, and our wedding was right around the corner. Everything seemed perfect until my mom decided to throw a wrench in the works. I was lounging on the couch, flipping through a bridal magazine when my phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I answered with a cheerful, "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "Robin, honey, I need your opinion," she said, her voice laced with excitement. "What kind of suit do you think would look best on Tom when he walks you down the aisle?" "I'm thinking maybe blue, but maybe black is more traditional?" I blinked, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Grandpa's walking me down the aisle." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "What?" "No, Tom's doing it. He's got a teenage daughter, and he wants to practice. You know, to get a feel for when it's her turn." I sat up straight, my magazine forgotten. "Practice?" "Mom, I'm not some dress rehearsal for your boyfriend's future father of the bride moment." Grandpa's walking me down the aisle, end of story. But Tom. I don't care about Tom. I shouted, surprising myself with the intensity of my anger. I'm not going to be his guinea pig. If he wants to practice so badly, tell him to find some other wedding to crash. Robin Elizabeth Carter, you listen to me. I hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again, but I ignored it, tossing it aside as if it had burned me. As I sat there, my heart pounding, memories started flooding back. Dad's face, his warm smile, the way he used to swing me around in the backyard. He'd died when I was 10, leaving a gaping hole in our lives that Mom had desperately tried to fill. I remembered the parade of men that followed, all truckers from the transportation company where Mom worked. She'd bring them home, introducing each one as the one, her future husband, my future stepfather. But they never lasted long. Mom was intense, clingy. She'd scare them off, and then the next one would appear, another Mr. Right in a never-ending cycle. As I sat there, lost in memories, I couldn't help but remember how I'd sought refuge with my grandparents during those tumultuous years. They were my safe haven, a stark contrast to the chaos at home. I was about 13 when things really started to get out of hand. One day, I came home from school to find Mom in a screaming match with some woman I'd never seen before. "You home-wrecking bitch," the stranger shrieked, her face red with fury. "That's my husband." Mom, never one to back down, fired right back. "He told me he was single. Don't blame me for your marital problems." And there, lounging in our ratty armchair, was Mom's latest boyfriend. I think his name was Dave or Dan, I honestly couldn't keep track anymore. He was watching the two women fight with a smug grin on his face, like it was some kind of twisted entertainment. I stood frozen in the doorway, my backpack slipping off my shoulder. "Mom?" I called out weakly. Both women whirled to face me. The stranger's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Is this your daughter?" she spat at Mom. "Does she know what kind of woman her mother is?" "Leave her out of this," Mom yelled back. Dave Ordand finally stood up. Ladies, he drawled. "No need to fight. There's plenty of me to go around." The stranger let out a strangled scream and lunged at him. I took that as my cue to bolt, locking myself in my room until the shouting stopped. That night, I heard Mom crying through the thin walls of our apartment. Dave Ordand had left with his wife, and Mom was alone again. As I grew older, things didn't get better. By the time I was 15, I was doing everything I could to avoid being home. It wasn't just the revolving door of Mom's boyfriends anymore, it was the way they looked at me. I remember one guy, Rick, eyeing me up and down as I grabbed a snack from the kitchen. "Your girl's filling out nicely," he told Mom. Mom just laughed. "She takes after me," she said proudly, completely oblivious to how uncomfortable I was. I started spending more time at the library, at friends' houses, anywhere but home. But Mom didn't get it. She'd call me selfish for not wanting to hang out with her and her latest flame. "Robin, honey," she said one day, "come meet Jeff. He's great with kids. We could be such a happy family, the three of us." I looked at Jeff, saw the way his eyes roved over me, and felt sick. "No thanks," I muttered, retreating to my room. That night, I called my grandpa. "Can I come stay with you for a while?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Of course, sweet pea," he said without hesitation. "You're always welcome here." It didn't take long for my grandparents to notice something was wrong. One evening, as we sat around their kitchen table, the words just tumbled out of me. I told them everything, the parade of men, the uncomfortable stares, Mom's obliviousness to it all. By the time I finished, Grandma had tears in her eyes, and Grandpa's face was set in a hard line I'd never seen before. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and firm. "We're putting a stop to this right now." The next day, we drove to Mom's place. Grandpa didn't waste any time. "Carol, what you're doing is immoral and dangerous. You're bringing strange men into your home with a young girl present. Do you have any idea what could happen?" Mom's face flushed red. How dare you, she shrieked. You've never wanted me to be happy. You're trying to ruin my life. Your life? Grandpa shot back. What about Robin's life? What about her safety? Robin's fine, Mom insisted. She's just being dramatic. So what, you're going to take her away from me, is that it? Grandpa nodded. Robin's coming to live with us. You can sort out your personal life without putting her at risk. Fine, Mom spat. Take her. It'll be easier to find a good man without a teenager cramping my style anyway. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known, deep down, that Mom saw me as a burden sometimes, but hearing her say it out loud, it hurt more than I'd expected. Grandma squeezed my shoulder. Go pack your things, sweetie, she said softly. I nodded, heading to my room in a daze. As I threw clothes into a duffel bag, I could hear Mom and Grandpa still arguing in the living room. When I came back out, Mom was standing by the door, arms crossed. So this is it, huh, she said. You're choosing them over me? I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. She seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. For a moment, I saw the scared, lonely woman behind the brash exterior. I'm choosing me, Mom, I said quietly. I hope someday you'll understand that. She didn't answer, just turned away as I walked out the door with my grandparents. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. Living with my grandparents was like stepping into a different world. Gone were the late-night arguments, the parade of strange men, and the constant tension. Instead, I found myself surrounded by love, stability, and support. I still went to the same school, saw the same friends. But everything felt different. Better. I could focus on my studies without worrying about what, or who, I'd find when I got home. Mom was Mom. She'd call occasionally, usually to talk about her latest boyfriend or to complain about work. She rarely asked about me, and when she did, she didn't seem to really listen to the answers. When graduation day rolled around, I was surprised to see her there. She sat with my grandparents, looking uncomfortable and out of place. You look nice, honey, she said after the ceremony, giving me a quick hug. Listen, I've got to run. I've got a date with this great guy I met at work. You understand, right? And just like that, she was gone. I watched her rush off, feeling a mixture of hurt and relief. My grandparents helped me move into my dorm room that fall, setting me up with everything I needed for college. I'd decided to study to become an investment manager, fascinated by the world of finance and planning. That's where I met Jake. We were in the same introduction to financial markets class, both of us bright-eyed freshmen with big dreams. We became friends first, study buddies who'd quiz each other late into the night at the campus coffee shop. It wasn't until our senior year that things shifted. We were working on a group project, hunched over spreadsheets in the library, when Jake suddenly looked up at me. Robin, he said, his voice serious. I think I'm in love with you. I blinked at him, surprised. And then I realized I felt the same way. Our relationship blossomed quickly after that. Jake was kind, smart, and stable, everything I'd never had in my life with Mom. When he proposed after graduation, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I saw Mom a few times during those years, usually when I'd stop by her place during breaks. Her new boyfriend, Tom, was always there, younger than her, with slicked back hair and a cocky grin. Robin, this is Tom, Mom had said, beaming. He's got a daughter, 7 years younger than you. Isn't that great? I'd smiled politely, not sure what to say. Tom had looked me up and down in a way that made me uncomfortable, reminding me of all those boyfriends from years ago. After reliving all these memories, I knew I needed to talk to Grandpa. Jake and I drove out to my grandparents' house one weekend, the weight of Mom's demand heavy on my mind. Grandpa, I said as we sat in their cozy living room. Mom called me about the wedding. She wants her boyfriend Tom to walk me down the aisle. Says he wants to practice for when his own daughter gets married. Grandpa reached out and took my hand. Robin, I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle. But if you wanted to choose Tom or anyone else, I'd understand. It's your day. I shook my head, feeling tears prick at my eyes. There's no choice to make, Grandpa. It's always been you. Jake, sitting next to me, squeezed my other hand. I support whatever Robin wants, he said. She's told me about everything you've done for her, sir. I can't think of anyone better to give her away. Grandpa smiled, his eyes suspiciously moist. Well then, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, I guess we'd better start practicing our walk, hadn't we? As we all laughed, I felt a wave of love and gratitude wash over me. This was my real family, the people who'd stood by me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. And in a few short weeks, I'd be adding Jake to that family officially. I thought I'd put an end to Mom's ridiculous demands, but apparently, I'd underestimated her determination. The calls kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. Robin, you need to reconsider, Mom pleaded one evening. Tom's really upset. If you don't let him walk you down the aisle, he might leave me. Then maybe he's not the right guy for you, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Look, I'm busy planning my wedding. Can we please drop this? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke again, her voice was cold. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I won't come to your wedding at all. Something inside me snapped. You know what? Fine. Don't come. It's not like you've been a real mother to me anyway. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking. Part of me felt guilty for lashing out, but a bigger part felt relieved. Like I'd finally said what I'd been holding back for years. Days passed, and I started to think maybe that was the end of it. Maybe Mom had finally gotten the message. I threw myself into wedding planning, grateful for the distraction. But then, about a week later, I was at work when my boss, Mr. Johnson, called me into his office. As soon as I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Mom was there, mascara streaking down her face, with Tom hovering behind her like a bodyguard. Robin, Mom cried, throwing herself at me. How could you be so cruel to your own mother? I stood frozen, completely blindsided. Mom, what are you doing here? She turned to Mr. Johnson, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. Mr. Johnson, you have to talk some sense into her. She's breaking her poor mother's heart. Mr. Johnson stammered, clearly out of his depth. Mom barreled on, gesturing wildly between herself and Tom. She won't let her parents walk her down the aisle at her wedding. Can you believe it? After everything we've done for her. Please, make her listen to reason. Before anyone could say anything else, Mom grabbed Tom's arm and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Johnson leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Robin, I think you owe me an explanation. What exactly is going on? Haltingly, I began to explain, about my childhood, about living with my grandparents, about Mom's revolving door of boyfriends. I told him about her insistence that Tom walk me down the aisle, and my refusal. To my surprise, Mr. Johnson's face softened as I spoke. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. You know, Robin, your mother reminds me a lot of my ex-wife, he said, shaking his head. I divorced her because of similar, dramatic tendencies. Always making everything about her, never considering how her actions affected others. Relief washed over me. So, you understand? He nodded. I do. And I want you to know that I'm on your side here. Your wedding day is about you, not your mother or her boyfriend. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I really appreciate that. However, he continued, his tone turning serious, we can't have scenes like this at the office. It's unprofessional and disruptive. I need you to handle this situation, Robin. Make sure it doesn't happen again. As I left Mr. Johnson's office, relief gave way to anger. How dare Mom show up at my workplace like that? She could have cost me my job. My first stop was the security desk. I explained the situation to Dave, the head of security, showing him a picture of Mom and Tom on my phone. These two are not to be allowed in the building under any circumstances, I said firmly. If they show up, please call the police immediately. Back at my desk, I opened my email, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I typed out a message to Mom. Mom, your behavior today was completely unacceptable. You had no right to show up at my workplace and cause a scene. You could have jeopardized my career with your selfish actions. I've tried to be patient with you, tried to explain my feelings, but you refused to listen. So let me be crystal clear, you are no longer invited to my wedding. Neither is Tom. I'm asking you, no, I'm telling you, to stay away from me. Don't call, don't email, don't show up at my work or my home. If you can't respect my boundaries, I'll have no choice but to take legal action. Robin. I hit send before I could second guess myself, then sat back, feeling drained but oddly liberated. That evening, I told Jake what had happened. He wrapped me in a tight hug. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, he said. But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. We called my grandparents and Jake's parents, explaining the situation. To my relief, they all supported my decision. As Jake and I went through our wedding guest list that night, crossing off Mom and Tom's names, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Our wedding would be smaller now, but it would be filled with people who truly loved and supported us. Are you okay? Jake asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at him, at the love and concern in his eyes, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Yeah, I said, squeezing back. I really am. And I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life, setting boundaries, and surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared about me. It wasn't how I'd imagined my wedding planning would go, but somehow, it felt right. The day I'd dreamed of for so long had finally arrived. I stood at the chapel doors, my heart fluttering with excitement. Grandpa, dapper in his tuxedo, squeezed my hand reassuringly. The music swelled, and we took our first step. But before we could even enter the chapel, a shrill voice cut through the air. Stop right there. Mom came barreling down the aisle, Tom hot on her heels. She jabbed a finger at Grandpa. You, move aside. Tom's walking Robin down the aisle. I couldn't believe it. After everything, she was still trying to make my wedding about her. Mom, what are you doing here? You weren't invited. Please leave. Now. Mom's face crumpled, and the waterworks started. I'd seen this act too many times to be fooled. How can you be so cruel? I raised you. I loved you after your father died. Grandpa, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Carol, that's enough. Everyone here knows the truth about who really raised Robin. I glanced around at our guests. Their faces showed a mix of shock, sympathy, and, was that a hint of amusement? Clearly, Mom's theatrics weren't winning her any fans. Mom must have noticed too, because her tactics suddenly changed. Fine, she spat. I don't need you, Robin. I have Tom. He appreciates me, unlike you. You've always been stupid and arrogant. I disown you. Before I could respond, Grandpa cut in, his voice cold. Well, Carol, if that's how you feel, then I have something to say too. You're no longer welcome in my house, yes, my house. And I'm writing you out of my will. The change in Tom's demeanor was instant and almost comical. He paled, taking a step back from Mom. Carol. Sorry, but I didn't sign up for all this drama. Plus, without the house and inheritance, well, let's just say, I think I'd be better off finding a younger girlfriend. We're done. Mom's face contorted with rage. She let out a wordless scream, grabbing at her hair. You're all against me. How dare you? I'll show you. Before she could finish her threat, 2 police officers who had been quietly called by one of the guests appeared at her side. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us," one of them said firmly. As they led Mom away, her shouts echoing through the chapel, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and oddly enough, a bit of pity. This was rock bottom for her, and part of me hoped it might finally be the wake-up call she needed. 30 minutes later, after I'd had a chance to touch up my makeup and calm my nerves, I once again stood at the chapel doors with Grandpa. As we walked down the aisle, I saw Jake waiting for me at the altar, his face full of love and concern. Our eyes met, and suddenly, all the drama of the past hour faded away. This was our moment, and nothing, not even my mother's antics, could take that away from us. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with laughter and happy tears. And as Jake and I shared our first kiss as husband and wife, I knew that whatever challenges life threw our way, we'd face them together, surrounded by the love and support of our true family. During the reception, guest after guest approached us, offering words of support and condemning my mother's behavior. "You handled that like a champ, Robin," my college roommate said, hugging me tight. "Your mom's got some nerve," Jake's uncle grumbled. "But you showed her what real class looks like." And as Jake and I drove off to start our honeymoon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The drama with Mom was behind us now. We had a whole new life ahead of us, and I couldn't wait to see what adventures it would bring. It's been a year since the wedding, and life has settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Jake and I live in a cozy apartment just a stone's throw from our offices. It's not huge, but it's ours, filled with love and laughter. Every morning, we walk to work together, hand in hand, talking about our plans for the future. The house where I grew up, the one Mom used to live in, now provides us with a steady stream of rental income. We've turned it into something positive, using the extra money to save for our future and occasionally splurge on weekend getaways. As for Mom, well, I hear things through the grapevine now and then. Apparently, she's renting a small apartment across town. And true to form, she's on the hunt for her next soulmate. Some things never change, I guess. I haven't spoken to her since the wedding. Sometimes I feel a twinge of guilt about that, but then I remember the years of chaos, the constant drama, the way she tried to hijack one of the most important days of my life. And I know I made the right choice. One sunny Saturday morning, as Jake and I are having breakfast on our tiny balcony, he asks, "Do you ever think about reaching out to your mom?" I take a sip of coffee, considering the question. Sometimes, I admit. But then I remember how peaceful our life is now, how drama-free. And I'm not ready to risk that. Jake nods, understanding. "You know I'll support whatever you decide, right?" I smile, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I know. And that means everything to me." Later that day, we're walking through the park when we pass a mother and daughter having a picnic. They're laughing, heads close together, sharing some private joke. For a moment, I feel a pang of what might have been. But then I think about Grandma and Grandpa, who call every Sunday without fail. I think about Jake's parents, who have embraced me as a daughter. I think about our friends, who rallied around us during the wedding fiasco and have been our rock ever since. I realize that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who support you, who love you unconditionally. And by that measure, I'm rich beyond my wildest dreams. I never thought my life would turn out like this. My name's Rita, and this is my story. I was born to farmers, good people who taught me the value of hard work from the day I could walk. Our days started before dawn, tending to the animals and crops. Life was simple back then. I'd go to school, come home, and help around the farm. Weekends were for family time and catching up on chores. I didn't know any different, and I didn't want to. But things changed when I graduated high school. My parents, bless their hearts, wanted more for me than a life on the farm. "Rita, we've been talking," Dad said one evening as we sat around the dinner table. "Your mom and I think you should go to college." And just like that, my world expanded. I packed my bags and moved to the city, a place so different from everything I'd known that it might as well have been another planet. College was an experience. The classes were interesting enough, but it was the people that really opened my eyes. Kids from all walks of life, with dreams and ambitions I'd never even considered. And then there was Jack. I met him in my second year. He was charming, confident, and so different from the farm boys back home. Jack knew exactly what he wanted from life, or so I thought. "Life's too short to waste it working yourself to the bone," he'd say, lounging on the grass outside the library. "We should enjoy ourselves while we're young." I was smitten. Here was someone who saw life as an adventure, not just an endless series of chores. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were talking about marriage. When I told my parents, they were cautious. They wanted to meet Jack, to get to know the man who'd stolen their daughter's heart. "He seems nice enough," Dad said after Jack's first visit to the farm. "But there's something. I don't know." "Just be careful, Rita." I brushed off his concerns. What did my old-fashioned father know about modern love? Jack was perfect, and we were going to have a perfect life together. My parents, bless them, paid for our wedding and even bought us an apartment in the city. "We want you to have a good start," Mom said, her eyes misty. "Thanks, Mom, Dad," I said, hugging them tight. "I promise I'll make you proud." As Jack and I stood at the altar, exchanging vows and rings, I thought my life was set. I had a husband who loved me, a good job in the city, and a bright future ahead. The first couple of years of our marriage were, well, I thought they were good. Jack and I both had jobs in the city, and we settled into a routine. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming even then. "Rita, do we have to go to your parents' farm this weekend?" Jack would whine every time I suggested a visit. "It smells like manure, and your dad always wants me to help with something." I'd sigh and try to reason with him. "They're my family, Jack. And they've done so much for us." "Fine," he'd grumble. "But I'm not shoveling any cow crap." I brushed it off as city boy squeamishness. After all, I'd grown up with those smells and chores. But now I wonder if I should have seen it as a red flag. 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was over the moon, and my parents were ecstatic. "A grandchild," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Rita, we're so happy for you." Jack's reaction was less enthusiastic. "A kid? Already? I guess that's okay." I chalked it up to nerves. Surely he'd warm up to the idea of being a father. My parents, bless their hearts, continued to support us. They bought us a car, paid for vacations. I was grateful, but Jack seemed to take it all for granted. "Of course they're helping us," he'd say. "That's what parents do." When our son, Tommy, was born, I fell in love all over again. But Jack, well, he tried, I'll give him that. But fatherhood didn't come naturally to him. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd complain when Tommy cried at night. "Some of us have to work in the morning." I'd bite my tongue and remind myself that we were both adjusting to parenthood. Life went on. We visited the farm when we could, though Jack's reluctance grew with each trip. "Your dad asked me to help fix the tractor again," he'd grouse. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake." I'd watch my dad and Jack working together, oil-stained and sweaty. Dad would be patient, explaining each step, while Jack would grimace and fumble with the tools. Then, tragedy struck. Within a year, both my parents passed away. I was devastated. "They're gone, Jack," I sobbed into his shoulder. "I can't believe they're gone." He patted my back awkwardly. "It'll be okay. At least they left us the farm." His words jolted me. The farm. My family's legacy. And all Jack could think about was what we'd inherited? In the midst of my grief, Jack dropped a bombshell. "We should sell the farm," he said one night over dinner. "We could buy a big house in the city. Live like kings." I wanted to argue, to fight for my family's legacy. But I was tired, worn down by grief and the demands of motherhood. And wasn't a wife supposed to support her husband's decisions? Okay, I said quietly. If you think it's best. And just like that, with a few signatures on some papers, my family's history was sold off to the highest bidder. The money went into our joint account, and Jack was like a kid in a candy store. We're set for life, Rita, he crowed. No more slaving away at work. We can do whatever we want. I nodded and smiled, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. This was what Jack wanted, and I was his wife. I had to support him, right? Life after selling the farm was different. The money from the sale cushioned us nicely, I'll give Jack that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours, and for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as the years went by, I started noticing things. Jack, who'd never been a hard worker to begin with, seemed to lose all motivation. He'd quit jobs at the drop of a hat, always with some excuse. That boss was a jerk, he'd say, or they expected too much. I'm not a slave, you know. I'd try to reason with him. Jack, we can't live off the farm money forever. We need to think about our future. He'd wave me off. Relax, Rita. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death? Meanwhile, our son Tommy was growing up fast. He graduated high school, then college, and before I knew it, he was working and living on his own. I was proud of him, but I missed having him around. Then one day, I was flipping through the newspaper when a name caught my eye. It was an article about a successful concrete production plant, owned by none other than Jack's uncle, Robert. Jack, I called out, did you see this article about your Uncle Robert? Jack's face darkened. I don't want to hear about that old tyrant, he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Jack's version of it. How his parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle. How Robert had been overbearing and controlling, trying to force Jack into the family business. He never listened to what I wanted, Jack had told me years ago. It was always about what he thought was best. So I left. Started my own life. Looking at Jack now, lounging in his robe at 2 in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe it's time to make peace? I suggested gently. It's been years, Jack. People change. Jack's reaction was explosive. Make peace? With that control freak? No way in hell, Rita. Drop it. I let it go, but the incident left me unsettled. There was so much anger there, so much resentment. It made me wonder what else Jack was carrying around, what other parts of himself he was hiding. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I overheard Jack on the phone. His voice was curt, dismissive. I am not interested in his life and it does not concern me, he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. Who was that, honey? Jack's face was a mask of indifference. Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him. I stared at him, shocked. Jack. That's a terrible thing to say. He raised you. Yeah, and made my life hell, he snapped. I'm not going to see him. End of story. As I watched Jack settle back into his armchair, remote in hand, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without a word to Jack, I went to our bedroom and called Tommy. Hey, sweetie, I said when he picked up. How would you feel about meeting your great-uncle? Tommy was surprised, but agreed readily. An hour later, we were walking into the hospital, my heart pounding. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed voices. And there, in a bed surrounded by monitors, lay Jack's uncle Robert. He looked small and frail, nothing like the tyrannical figure Jack had described. When we introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. Rita, Tommy, he said, his voice weak but warm. Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long. Over the next hour, Robert told us his side of the story. How he'd taken Jack in after his parents died, raised him as his own. I loved that boy, Robert said, his voice cracking. I wanted him to have everything. To carry on the family business, to have a good life. But Jack, it seemed, had other ideas. He said he didn't want the responsibility, Robert continued. Said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as Robert's words painted a picture I recognized all too well. Jack demanded I sell the business, Robert said, shaking his head. Wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. Said I owed him a carefree life. I glanced at Tommy, seeing my own shock mirrored in his face. I told him that's not how life works, Robert went on. That money needs to be earned. I begged him to stay, to learn the business. But he just got angry. Said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work a day in his life. As I sat there in Uncle Robert's hospital room, memories from the past decade started flooding back. Like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place, I saw our life together in a new, harsh light. Jack had never held a job for long. He always chose part-time work, called in sick often, took countless days off. I'd attributed it to stress, to him being a free spirit. But now I saw the truth. Life is for pleasure, Rita, he'd always say. Why kill ourselves working? I felt sick to my stomach as realization dawned. Jack hadn't married me for love. He'd married me for my family's money, for the comfortable life he thought I could provide. I was just a means to an end, the rich bride he'd promised his uncle he'd find. Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of this truth settled on me. Our whole life together, our marriage, our family, it was all built on a lie. Uncle Robert's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice weak. I won't be able to leave anything to you or Tommy. I wanted to, but... It's okay, I said, squeezing his hand. We don't need anything. I had plans, Robert continued, growing agitated. A new project. It would have changed everything. But I ran out of time. Suddenly, Robert's face contorted in pain. The machines around him started beeping urgently. You need to leave, a nurse said, rushing in. Now. A few days later, the call came. Uncle Robert had passed away. When I told Jack, his reaction made my blood run cold. Finally, he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. Took the old bastard long enough. I stared at him, disgusted. Jack, he was your uncle. He raised you. He waved dismissively. Yeah. So, when's the funeral? Do we need to go to that? In the end, Jack didn't attend. Tommy and I organized the funeral ourselves, a small, dignified affair that I hoped would have made Uncle Robert proud. While I was grieving for a man I'd barely known, my husband was at home, gleefully calculating his newfound wealth. The factory's got to be worth at least 10 million, I heard him saying on the phone when I got home. Can you believe it? I'm rich. I watched him strut around our house, boasting about his inheritance, and felt nothing but revulsion. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And then, things got worse. You know, Rita, Jack said one evening, his eyes cold. You're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me? He shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. You heard me. I'm rich now. I can do better. Over the next few weeks, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd stay out late, coming home in the early hours reeking of booze and perfume. More than once, I spotted lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd brush me off. Mind your own business, he'd sneer. You should be grateful I come home at all. As I lay awake one night, listening to Jack stumble in at 3 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better. But more importantly, I needed to know the truth about everything, about Jack, about the inheritance, about the life I thought we'd built together. One morning, after another night of Jack stumbling in at dawn, I'd had enough. Where were you? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Jack sneered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. None of your damn business, Rita. You should be grateful I come back at all. I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is? He ignored my question, instead fixing me with a calculating look. Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right? The sudden change of topic threw me off guard. What, Jack, we've spent it all. The accounts are empty. His face twisted into an ugly mask of disgust. Empty? You've got to be kidding me. He paced the room, muttering to himself. Then he turned back to me, his eyes cold. Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here. Done with you. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Tommy walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Jack's demeanor changed instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. Tommy, my boy. Just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me. He produced a document from his pocket, thrusting it at Tommy. It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Robert's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway. Tommy glanced at me, confusion clear on his face. But after my nod, he took the paper and signed it without hesitation. Jack's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. I want a divorce, he announced, his voice cold and flat. I never loved you, Rita. I just tolerated you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore. The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd suspected, hearing it laid out so brutally. I'm moving to Uncle Robert's house, Jack continued, already pulling out a suitcase. Don't try to contact me. It's over. And just like that, he was gone. 30 years of marriage, packed away in a suitcase and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Mom? Tommy's voice was soft, concerned. Mom, are you okay? I turned to my son, my rock, and felt the dam break. Tears streamed down my face as Tommy wrapped his arms around me. It's okay, Mom, he murmured, holding me tight. We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay. As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he'd become. Kind, compassionate, everything his father wasn't. And I realized something. You're the best thing he ever did, I whispered to Tommy. The only good thing to come out of this marriage. Tommy squeezed me tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together, we'd face whatever came our way. The weeks following Jack's departure were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to keep my head high, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy. Especially when Jack seemed determined to flaunt his new life in my face. It started with the Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle Robert's mansion, now Jack's new home, flooded his timeline. I tried to ignore it, to focus on healing, but then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them. Blonde, beautiful, barely older than our son. In one photo, Jack had his arm around her, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption made my stomach churn. Meet my fiancé, Candy. Upgrade complete. The call started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, even Tommy's old school teachers. All of them asking questions I didn't want to, answer. Rita, dear, is everything okay? We saw Jack's posts, what's going on? Are you and Jack really? I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant reminders of Jack's betrayal, it was too much. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Jack and asked to meet, after consulting with a lawyer. The day of the meeting arrived. I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Jack swaggered in, Candy on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something Jack whispered in her ear. Well, Jack sneered, pulling out a chair for Candy. If it isn't the old ball and chain. Candy, honey, meet Rita. The starter wife. Candy gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil. But I kept my cool. I have the divorce papers here, I said, sliding them across the table. I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else. To my surprise, he picked up the pen without argument. Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now. He scrawled his signature across the documents. He turned to Candy, his voice sickeningly sweet. Now I can finally be with someone I truly love. Someone worthy of me. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly. As I walked out of the cafe, I heard Jack's mocking laughter behind me. But I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed over the papers to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of serving up justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a headline splashed across the local newspaper. Local business tycoon's empire crumbles, nephew left with massive debt. It turned out that Uncle Robert had taken out an enormous loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He'd mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Tommy and I hadn't understood the implications at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Jack's new life crumbled around him. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything. And still, he was left owing nearly $1 million. The cherry on top? His young bride, Candy, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Jack wasn't the wealthy catch she'd thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Jack. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking nothing like the smug, wealthy man who'd walked out on me months ago. He was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Rita, he said, his voice cracking. I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk? Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Jack poured out his heart. He told me how he'd lost everything, how he'd realized what truly mattered in life. I was wrong, Rita, he said, his eyes pleading. So wrong. But I see now that you were the only one who ever truly cared for me. The only one I've ever really loved. Then, to my utter disbelief, Jack got down on one knee, producing a small velvet box. Rita, please. Give me another chance. Marry me again. Together, we can overcome anything. For a moment, I was speechless. Then, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle and grew into full-blown, tears streaming down my face laughter. Jack's face fell. What's so funny? When I finally caught my breath, I looked him straight in the eye. Oh, Jack. Did you really think it would be that easy? That you could treat me like garbage, throw me away, and then come crawling back when things got tough? His expression darkened. Now listen here, he snarled, jumping to his feet. This is my house too. I have rights. I calmly walked to the drawer where I kept our divorce papers, pulling them out and showing him his own signature. No, Jack, you don't. You signed away any claim to this house. It's mine. Now get out, or I'll call the cops. For a moment, I thought he might try to argue further. But something in my expression must have told him I meant business. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I called Tommy and told him everything. My wonderful son was supportive as always. You did the right thing, Mom, he said. I'm proud of you. Those words meant more to me than he could ever know. In the weeks that followed, I made some big decisions. The house, with all its memories both good and bad, felt too big for just me. So I sold it, using the money to buy a cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood I'd always loved. At 60, I'm finding that life is just beginning. I've started traveling, seeing all the places Jack always promised we'd visit but never did. I've taken up painting, joined a book club, even tried my hand at salsa dancing. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of Jack around town. He looks older now, worn down by his mistakes and misfortunes. Life didn't turn out the way I expected. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I'm truly, completely, happily me.